Hey everybody, David R. Becker here with BeckerArt. Today I'm going to tell you about the question I get most of the time from beginners and also from people who just always have heard that watercolor is one of the hardest mediums to do and you can never correct your mistakes like oils or acrylic. And yes, that is true. Can't do it like acrylic and oils, but there is a ways of correcting your mistakes or something didn't work out exactly the way you wanted to. And yes, you can correct those. There's many ways of doing it actually. And so I wanted to show you today how I'm going to take this scene right here, this scene, which I don't like up here. And I did this one twice because I always kind of do a painting twice when I do my Thursday night paint-alongs. But here was one I had done. You can tell the difference between the top of this and look at how bland that looks back there. And most people say, no, you can't change that because you won't get the freshness that you normally get when you do a one wash. But you can literally take a whole area and make it all different. Really, you can. I'm going to show you today how to do that. And so the first thing you have to do is figure out what the problem was for one. And something like this, I did it again. So a second time, if you do it again, the painting again, of course, I studied this painting and I thought, what was the problem? And it just seemed very bland up there. And I know I wanted to push back, but I also wanted to have the highlights of these trees a little bit brighter. And I didn't like the triangle shape that was making my view go off the page, so I made a little bush there, and I kept the white of the paper. Now I may not get back to the white of the paper, but we'll see. We're going to show you how this is possible. So the first thing you do is you look at your painting and go, hey, is there too much pigment on there, and what do I want to change? And so I pretty much want to get this light again. I like to get this area light again. And then the background, there's quite a bit of pigment back here because I did this wash like maybe 2 times, and there's quite a bit of pigment in there. So to make this look fresh again, the first thing I've got to do is take away some of this pigment. And you have to be really careful depending on what kind of paper you're using. If you have a really rugged paper, then yeah, you can go ahead and scrub it a little bit. But if it's something that's like the paper I used here, I think is Stonehenge Aqua, and you can't rub it really hard because it will kind of ruin the paper, basically. So what I do is I take clean water, and the first thing I do is get rid of some of this, some of the pigment that's underneath there, because I want to get back to the white of the paper. And I don't think I use too many staining colors, but it will also absorb into the paper, so it's hard to get that back to the white. But you can always use white paint. If you're a traditionalist, no, you shouldn't use it. But if you aren't, so what I do is I wet the area. And I call it tickling your paper. I'm just putting water down and I'm eliminating the scrubbing. I don't want to scrub, I just want to tickle it very lightly. I take the brush and put the water. I put clear water, and sometimes if all you want to do is make it pick up the paint, bring it back up to the surface, and then let it float back down into the surface, so it all becomes more of a even wash, that's possible, really. It's like if I did this like this, if I'm just tickling it and I'm not putting hardly any pressure on my brush, I'm just kind of letting it sit on there with no pressure. See, I'm just kind of like, I'm just moving it around where it's barely, I'm not scrubbing, I'm tickling it. So it's kind of funny, right? So I'm tickling it, and if I want to take this out of there, I try. You can use paper towel and then dab it, but the first thing I want to do is dry off my brush and try to eliminate some of it by soaking it up into the brush. Again, the least amount of time I can actually touch the paper, the better. I really don't want to touch the paper very much and ruin the paper. So what I do is I just wet it and soak it, and hopefully this pulls some of the pigment out of the paper too. And this painting is about 1.5 years old, so this doesn't matter how long it's been sitting there because it wasn't protected with wax or varnish. So I can put water back on it to eliminate and get some of this pigment off of here again. But look at if I did this and I kind of let the pigment float again, because it's all about pigment that's floating there, right? And if I take away the pigment and just bring it back up into the paper, into the wetness, into the puddle, it will soften itself and smooth itself out again. Now I may have to put more pigment in there because it does rough up the paper a little bit, so to make it even more smooth, then you just let it put some more pigment on top of that, right? But I want to get it to this. I want to get it to where I can make it really light here. And I can either do that with white paint or see how far I can get back to the white of the paper, which, depending on how you know, so I'm going to take my paper towel. I'm just going to like kind of go like this too, because you can just dry it up, you know, and look at how far back it got there. And now this, though, we'll take the pigment and put it on here, right? So I'm just blotting up the pigment that's in the puddle now. But the problem is I'm taking away the water too. So I'm going to re-wet it again. Re-wet again. Because now it looks terrible, right? Because you're seeing parts that stayed and parts that didn't stay. And so I'm going to re-wet again, tickling a little bit, trying to get a little bit more of the pigment gone. Because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be applying pigment back over the top of this. Now, the parts that are going to be lighter, they may have a little bit of this. They're never going to get back to the white, really. It's kind of hard to get back to the white. So to do that, what I would have to do is put a little bit of gouache, in there to get that back to a white color, basically. But see, I'm taking away the paint just so that it doesn't mix in with the paint that I'll be putting down afterwards. And this can be done in a small area or large area. This happens to be a large area, right? But I can also do it like if I want to do the little area here, right here or something. Now, I've got to realize, do I want to make it soft edge or hard edge? This is another thing. So if I want it hard edged like in here, I will have to wait until it dries, right? Because I'm going to do, but first I want to get this white or the light color so that you can see I cannot get with the back to the white of the paper. So the first thing I'm going to do is a wash like this, then maybe let that dry and then put another wash on top of that. We'll do that real quickly. So let me go right here and let me see if I can't take a little bit more of this out. And again, I'm tickling it. I'm not scrubbing. Some people like to, if you have a piece of paper that is very durable and really rough, and Arches is one of those papers that you can do that to, where you can then take your brush and kind of just, this paper will probably ruin by doing this because you'll pell it. You'll make it pell up. But see, if you take a little stiff like bristle brush, if you take a stiff bristle brush, a lot of times you can get the paint back out of the surface. Now, the one thing about like an Arch is it sucks in more, where this doesn't suck in as much, the paper. So that's also a thing too you got to think about, you know, when you're making a mistake, or if you don't like the area that you did, or you didn't plan it right enough, then so let's re-wet it and just show you how I'm going to get some of this lights back in here. So we're going to do that real quickly. I'm just going to re-wet the whole area like I'm starting from scratch, like I would start the whole painting over again. And I'm just going to do my light areas. And so I'm wetting it. And the water is, well, yeah, of course the water's wet. But I'm trying to even it out and just make it like a puddle of water. And then I'm going to take in some paints that have a little bit light in them and a little bit of white in them. So here's a Compose green. And so that's going to give me a little bit of light green. And I'm going to use that over here. I'm going to put a little white in that too. You can also use leaf green in there with white, because I want to get a really vibrant light back. And like I said, I cannot get it with the paper, because you saw I can only get that light as you see right there. But I can take white and let it float on top of there, and it will float and not look very opaque, because it's floating on top and it's just giving you a wash of pigment. But it is gouache. When you mix white with your watercolors, your transparent, it becomes gouache because it becomes opaque, right? And so I'm just going to do this right here too. I'm just going to put this a little bit more. Let's just take up some pure white here to show you that, you know, you can do this with clouds too. But this is always the way I talk about when I'm talking about learning how to work wet in the wet and letting the pigment float on top, and gives you an automatically soft edge, right? The soft edge will be automatic because it's floating, and you don't have to soften the edge yourself. You'll let the pigment do it and let the water mix itself with the pigment and let it soften itself. Now, if I want, I can also get some of the darks in there right away, but they can't be hard edged because it's wet, right? So, but if I want to get some of this greenery and blue that I have into the dark parts of the wash, that's fine too. And so I'm going to take a little bit of green, some dark green. I'm mixing some some Prussian blue and some quinacridone gold, which you don't see down here, sorry. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of that over here and just float it back into the surface. And it's going to be kind of lighter right here because I have white paint right there. But again, the edges are going to be softened on their own. And it will look like a very, very fresh wash, even though this is done after you kind of rubbed out a whole area, right? But it's floating, and so it gives the impression of another super fresh wash. Like this is the first wash you ever done on this paper. And actually, look at what it's doing with these little fingers. It's giving me a soft edge. It'll make it look like it's my first wash. And I'm just applying it over the paper like I would the first time, like when you do it the first time. Now this has to be wet in the wet. You have to do it wet in the wet because that's what gives you this soft edge and what's giving you the pigment to float over what's underneath it. And you always also have to go a little bit darker. You know, now this is kind of an opaque color because I mixed it with the white thing there. So you're going to get a little bit different a color than what you had there in the beginning. And so if I don't like that actual color, there's a little bit of orange in there that I'm missing. So I'm going to actually put some orange into this green and put that back in there. And now I feel that this is too white a color. So I'm going to take that out again. I'm just going to pull that out of the paper. Still wet. And so I just don't like that color. And so I'm going to take a little bit more of the opaque, the transparent color of the orange and a little bit of green. And that'll be a little bit more transparent and darker. But I want this to be a little bit darker back here and a little bit not so greenery like this this whitish green. It's kind of like a pastel green. I don't want that kind of green. So I'm just going to go in there with transparent colors. And you see how I'm floating it? This is all wet, right? This is all wet. Now, I'm not getting hard edges here like I did on the other painting because I'll have to wait for that to dry. See this right here? Those hard edges are hard-edged, but because it's dry, and so I'd have to wait for that. So I'm just going to put this in like this. And I'm going to make that, pull some of this into this area. But see how this will be a fresh wash again? It won't look overworked. It won't look overworked at all because I took away that paint, and this is fresh paint put on top, and it's covering up anything that was underneath. Even though it's transparent, it's making everything look a little bit softer because it's soft-edged. And I can just put in pure colors. I can float it on top, and it's going to cover up the little bit of scrapiness that you see in the paper because the paper looks really kind of like, doesn't it look a little bit like you scrubbed it? Well, I kind of did, but if you wet it and float a color on top, it should be just fine. And then again, this like I said, this is going to give you soft edge because everything is wet. And then in a second, I'm going to dry it really quickly, and I'm going to go in there and show you how to get, because then this part will be darker. But I want to put some blues and stuff in there, and so I want to get this to look hard-edged and make it look a little bit more like this. Now, and I'm also going to show you how I'm going to use gouache completely with now transparency, how to do that way too. So let me just dry this for a second. Hold on, let me put a little bit more blue in here. Maybe, and you can even make lines. You know how I always want you to learn how to work wet in the wet and make lines or make round dots or whatever you're going to make a little bit more while it's wet. So I'm just going to do this a little bit more like this is foliage maybe. But see how if it's wet in the wet, it'll be fine. It will be absolutely fine to let the pigment float right on top. And you saw it before, right? It was really dense green, and it looked very overworked, right? All right, let me just dry it here for a second. All right, we're back. And now it's dry, and you see how it looks fresh? And it even looks like the sun is shining through there because it's so light right there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do the background like this. Again, dark, but hopefully get it to look nice and crisp with a fresh bunch of paint that's going to be wet in the wet, except for this area, which is going to be hard-edged. So that'll have to be dry, and that's why I just dried it. And so I will wet to that area, and I call this wetting as you go along. And so I'm going to take some dark green colors. I'm going to use quinacridone gold, And I'm wetting it as I go along. And so I'm putting it right on top. And now this area over here is also kind of a bush over here. But I'm going to negative paint that a little bit. But I'm going to keep this one because I did make it light enough. And so I'm going to show you over there how I'm actually going to use gouache or watercolor with white to put some light right there. See, I'm just going to put this, and I'm wetting as I go along. And that doesn't mean you just have to use that one color. I can also float other colors in there. And by floating the colors, up there, it will make it look fresh again. It will not look like it was not done the first time or the third time. It will look like the first time you did it, the first time you went up there. And so this is where you can fool the viewer that you did this in one wash and you got it done, or in two washes, but you didn't screw up. It won't show that you screwed up. Nobody will know that I screwed up this painting the first time. So I'm going to go over here with a dark, and this is hard edge, right? I'm going to go with the hard edge right here. And then I'm going to wet this area and then apply the colors that I want. A little bit fresher this time. And I wanted to get a little bit more of the, like the blue, and get more of a bright blue in here. And float it into the water as you go along. You can wet it first a little bit and then float the color on top there. Look at how fresh that color looks. I mean, it doesn't look at all like the paper underneath was scrubbed or anything like that whatsoever. You can even put opaque colors like up here. Let's say I want to put like a light blue. Let's say I just decided, you know what, I really do want to have a little bit of sky poking through there. I could even do that. I can use like a really bright blue with white even, and I can float it. As long as I float it though, it has to be floated onto the surface. And so let me just take a little bit of this horizon blue. It's kind of dirty because I did something else over here. But watch this. I can just float that on top. And I can just put that right in there. And again, nobody will know. Nobody will know that this is your third or fourth or fifth wash. And I'm applying it, and I'll apply this thing again. This area is now wet, and so I want to give it a nice look. And maybe this can be a nice dark, but see, I'm letting that flow through there. And it's all about floating the pigment in that puddle of water. I can't tell you how many times I say that to my students, and because I really want to teach you how important that is to be able to control your edges in a wet wash. When you put down water, now this tree over here, I'm going to, again, negative paint around it. Negative paint around, so this is a hard edge then. And then some of these parts can go to a soft edged. I can just like take some of this and just soften it, right? Putting water on an edge of the dry sheet of paper makes it soft again. And I can also just real lightly do small areas of soft edges. See, I'm just kind of going in there. I can also get a little bit more detail in the hard edges too. So a combination of hard and soft edges. And look at how fresh that wash looks. Doesn't that wash looks absolutely fresh? Almost better than what I did here for, this is only two washes. And so that's the second wash, but look at how dramatic this one is. So it can be done. See, it was totally bad, right? It was, and the thing, I don't have a picture of it right now. So I have it back in the first slide here. But yeah, so it's like, look at the difference between having it nice and fresh again. And this will dry just like that. It'll dry a little bit lighter, but then you can go back in there and I can go get these parts to where I'm going to do a little bit more hard edge stuff or a little more details of the leaves. And I'm going to take a little bit more of the leaves here and some of the branches. I'll put some of the branches in here. But this is now fixed, right? Before it was not just good. It was not good at all. And if you feel like that too blue, that seems like a little bit blue. I'm just going to put it, while it's still wet, you got to do this while it's still wet, not while it gets damp. Because again, it has to soften itself. It has to float on top of the surface that you scrubbed out. And that'll just cover up any of the things that you did underneath there. It's the amount of pigment that you use that covers the bottom, but in a wet wash. In a wet wash. That's one important thing, is that it has to be wet, and you got to float it so it becomes soft edges. And the hard edges here, I could also soften them. Again, you can always soften an edge, a hard edge, by just taking a little bit of water underneath it and just kind of, maybe make it go soft here a little bit, maybe soft right there a little bit. Just soften it a little bit here and there. I like to do that a little bit on the bottom parts of there. And if this needs to have some more detail, which the other one does have some more darks in there, then wait till it's bone dry and then again go right over the top of that. You're allowed, I always allow my students to go 3 layers. After 3 layers, you got to start over. Sorry. But it's like 3 layers is the most you want to do in watercolor. Really, it's you can do more, but then what happens is there's too much pigment on top of pigment on top of pigment on top of pigment, and it's really hard to get a really nice wash, then a really crisp wash. So this is actually only one wash, right? Because I took away that other pigment underneath. There was still a little bit of a tint in the paper, but I put that right on top of the part, and so that's really only the first wash. This is now the first wash too, on top of the paper that I scrubbed a little bit. But now I can put 2 more on there if I want, really. But make sure that the kind of colors are the same if it's a hard edge. If it's still floating, you can put other light colors on top of that. But so now I wanted to show you one last thing, is that if you don't mind using opaques, and you can get this with opaques, like the flowers down here, like these flowers right there, those are opaque. Those are actually white and green paint and put on thick, like gouache. And I say gouache because gouache is opaque watercolor. It's still watercolor, it's just opaque. So it has a different name, opaque watercolor, as the name of gouache, but it's basically just opaque watercolor. It's still watercolor, it's not acrylic, it's not oils, it's not even a different kind of paint. It is just opaque watercolor. And that's the name they gave to opaque watercolor, gouache. So now I'm going to take a little bit of this green and this white. I'm using leaf green and white. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap up here and putting it on thick. And this will be like a little bit of like what you see in here. Again, this would have been the paper, me negative painting around it. That's the paper, but I also have some of the green in there too. So I can put some pure white in there too, and it will look very close to that too by the time I get done here. Look at this. See, I'm just putting a little bit of green and putting the edges like that. So there you have it, guys. Yes, you can go back into an area, and also, and I'm looking at this right now and see how there's a little light right there. I could have washed that out, or what I can do now is I can just go in here with my brush and just put it on there opaquely, and just kind of make that go across there. All right. So yes, you can use opaques. Yes, you can rub out. Yes, you can fix. You can definitely fix. Don't let anybody tell you. And the best thing I want to show you, last thing I want to show you, is some paintings that I ruined because I spilled stuff over them. So here's a painting I did, and it was sitting in the back of my van, and what happened was gesso got on here. I spilled a big thing of gesso or absorbent ground right on the painting. And so what I did right away, I washed it with water because this is still watercolor. And I right away just washed it. But look what it did when I washed everything away. I washed some of the pigment away. Well, that was just what I did here then. So I can fix it. I'm just like mad that I have to refix it because it was a really nice painting. So I'll go back in here now and do my wet into wet and put it right on top of there. It'll be no problem. And so yes, you can fix a watercolor. And same thing I did for this one. This was last year at the expo. This was in the same pile as that painting. And again, some gouache got on it, or absorbent ground. So this part is fine. That's the way it was, right? Over here. That's all good. And it was all nice over here. But over here, there's a big gob of white. And still some of it there that I didn't get off completely because I just took some water I had, I think, a drinking bottle, and just poured it over there and just let it all run off. But I'll just go back in here. I'll just go back in. And let me just show you. I'll take a little bit of the brown. I'll just go right over this again now, because it's okay to just wet it as you go along, or wet it first, and then float pigment in there. I can even float other colors in there too, because it's all wet into wet. You can float some other colors in there and see how bright you can still get this. And you can fix it. But always remember, if there's too much pigment on the paper, like if I want to fix something here, I have to rub it out first. And if you're trying to make a really smooth edge, let's say this is really smooth, and you you got a watermark in there and you want to get rid of that, you have to do the whole area. You just can't fix a little area if there's like a watermark and stuff. That's a little bit harder. You can probably spray it and do a little bit, but it's harder. But practice it, because basically what you're doing is you're getting rid of the pigment again. Sometimes you have to get rid of the pigment. Sometimes you don't have to. But re-wet it, let it float, and apply more pigment. And if there's too much pigment, get rid of that pigment and then wet it and then apply pigment right on top of there. So easy way. See how easy that would be to re-put it in there. You know, right now it's not dark because there's no pigment. I washed the pigment off with the water. All right. So look through your paintings, and if you want to try to repair some of your paintings, practice on old paintings that you don't like. You know, if there's one that didn't turn out and you don't like it, and you're thinking, you know, I'm going to throw this thing out. Don't throw it out. Re-wet it, or take everything off. Take the whole painting off and just start from scratch. You can do it. It's no big deal. It works perfectly fine. I proved it right there, right? I mean, that was really a bad painting. And let me just show you the difference from before. So here was the picture before, right? Look at the background. So the background before, and this is the same painting, but look at, by putting this in there, by making, you know, redoing it, pulling out that Christmas tree there, and just making things different, it works perfectly fine. All right, so give it a shot and see if you like doing that, or practice it, because I know a lot of my students have been when they're in the middle of their painting, they're all really frustrated, and they're frustrated because they look at their painting and go, it didn't work out the way I wanted to. Well, you can repair it. It's very simple. You saw how simple it was. Just tickle it, let it dry if you want a hard edge, and then put water down and float your pigment right on top. All right. See you on Thursday. And not sure what we're painting yet on Thursday, but see you then. All right. Bye-bye.